What up, you dirty heathen? It's another great and all-powerful sermon by the one true prophet, the one who can speak to the gaming gods themselves and deliver to you the pure, unadulterated gaming gospel. That's right, bitches. It's another episode of the Gaming Memories Podcast where I interview someone creative and interesting about their favorite gaming memories growing up. And on this episode of the motherfucking podcast, I have Will Barber, or also known as the Barber Who. Homeboy is a legitimate collector, and I've been following a lot of collectors on Instagram because that's how I find a lot of the obscure games on systems that I may have heard about or games that didn't even know existed. Then I go back and I try them and I have a lot of fun. And he is one of the collectors that I've been following for a long time, and he has posted a bunch of games, specifically sort of 90s to early 2000 JRPGs. There was a bunch that I missed, but he talks about a few on the podcast, a few that I should try out. Some cool gems. Koldeka is a turn-based sort of like tactics RPG that's also mixed with horror, kind of like Resident Evil with pre-rendered backgrounds. It's this really interesting JRPG. That is one example of a game that I discovered by following the Barber Who. He's got something like 2,000, some 3,000 some odd pieces in his collection. He posts every single day. Every single thing on his Instagram is from his actual collection. All around badass dude, knows a lot about video games, and I had a grand old time asking him about his favorite games growing up. I will put all the applicable links in the podcast description. Check him out, the Barber Who, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, etc., etc., etc. Will Barber, thanks again. I say these things in the name of Miyamoto the Father, Kojima the Son, and Carmack, the Holy Ghost. Enjoy the show. What's up? I've been stalking you on the Instagram for a hot minute.
Yeah, I've been listening to your podcast ever since you followed me, like way back when. So.
Oh, really? I had no idea.
I mean, I was like, you followed me back in like when I just started the thing, and I was like, oh, hey, this guy's cool. So I checked out the podcast, and I was like hooked ever since.
It was specifically the JRPGs, the PS1 JRPGs. A few was like, oh shit, this motherfucker's got some deep cuts. He knows some shit.
Yeah, my wallet's still crying, but
how many? Your collection is how many total items do you have in your collection?
1 second, I actually got an app for this. Let's see here.
It's got to be a lot. You have one of the bigger collections I've seen on Instagram.
So right now I'm sitting at 2,548 different games in the collection.
Damn, 2,548. Do you know off the top of your head, like which consoles and which games have like the percentage share?
It's mostly the PlayStation consoles.
Good man. Good man.
Like my, I'm not sure. I'd have to double check. It's either my PlayStation 1 or my PS2 collection. Those are like probably the biggest two.
And what year were you born?
Believe it or not, I'm actually a lot younger than people think. I was born in 95.
Holy shit. Wow.
Yep.
I just kind of figured it since you had a lot of PS1 games and PS2, like, oh, that's got to be like between 85 and 90.
Nope. I'm a youngin'.
Damn. So what was your first console then?
So you want me to do consoles or handhelds?
Well, okay, let me guess. That gives me a hint. I usually 97, 95, you said?
So I was born in 95. My Instagram profile thing is a little bit of a lie. It says I started gaming in 95, but in reality it was more like 97, 98-ish.
Ooh. And I have a suspicion it's going to be a handheld because you asked. What would be, you're either going to have Game Boy Color?
Yep.
Ha! Yes! Yeah,
still
baby.
Got that, still got one. I had the not quite green one, not quite blue one. It was like that tealish colored one.
And Pokemon, probably a big one in the beginning.
No, believe it or not, my first video game ever was Klax.
Klax.
Klax on the, the old Atari games, like puzzle game, like little tiles would fall down the screen. You'd have to like catch them and like do like pairs of 3 to get them to go away.
I don't know if I've heard of that. Or if I have, I've never... Oh, I've seen this, but man, I would have never remembered it.
So I got 2 games with my... the first console I've owned was the Game Boy Color, and I got 2 games with it. I had Mario Brothers Deluxe and Klax. And me being like... God, I must have been like 3 or 4 at the time. Thought, ooh, Clax, this looks cool.
Yeah, this looks actually. I don't know if I have ever seen this. The cover art like felt a little like ring. It tickled my brain a little bit, but I'm watching gameplay and I don't think I've ever seen this before.
So the Game Boy Color port is actually like one of the more recent ports. Like this game was like back in the 80s, and it was like basically ported to every system known to man.
Wow, and it's like the not as popular Tetris for the time.
Yeah, it was a decent success in the arcades, from what I've read. I know one of the main reasons why it's been ported to everything, it was part of Atari Games, who was going under the name Tengen at the time. It was kind of them like kind of sticking it to Nintendo because they had that whole fallout with the whole like cartridge like licensing policy.
Yeah, can you someone brought that up before. Do you know, can you give our listeners like a recap of that? Because that's really weird.
I'm not an expert at it, but basically the story goes is Nintendo kind of had like a stranglehold on like the market back then. Like you could only release like 3 games a year. You had to go directly through them.
They controlled the manufacturing of the cartridges as well, right? And they took a cut. Yeah. Basically,
there was a lockout chip in the NES cart that would basically prevent like unlicensed games from working on the NES. And Nintendo's other thing they did was they had like an exclusivity like contract. So they'd kind of like block out, like basically they had a stranglehold on the market, which is one of the main reasons why like Sega with the Master System like didn't stand a chance in the US at the time. And they did better in like Europe and Brazil. Yeah. Let's believe it or not.
That's weird. I actually have, basically from a few guests, have noticed that Europe, the Master System and the Genesis was king. But to an extent, because when I was a kid, it felt 50-50, but really the Super Nintendo seemed more popular. I don't know the actual numbers in America. I'm guessing Super Nintendo did better, but in Europe, in the UK specifically, Sega was just mollywhopping.
I believe in the US, the Super Nintendo did win in the end, but there was a good point where the Genesis had a market, like, was in the lead, and then they just completely blew it with, like, the Sega CD and the 32X and just they made so many mistakes that just cost them any sort of lead they had.
Yeah, that could be its own episode, when we might get into more of that, because I was one of the few people that had a 32X, and
see, that was all before me in general.
Yeah.
I think the 32X was coming out, I was like 1 maybe.
Yeah, I think it was 99, so you would have been 1 or 2, I think.
I think it was like 96 maybe.
Really? That much earlier? Man, I'm getting too many dates in my head. 32X release date.
It was either 95 or 96.
Oh, we're both wrong. 94. Oh, wow.
Yeah, so
shit.
I was in the womb at that point.
I must have gotten it later then, not like at launch. I remember my mom got sold by some sales guy. She brought it home. I think I got it for Christmas. And she said the guy at the store said it's going to make all the graphics better on all your existing Genesis games.
I think that was a common misconception with going around.
And I remember getting in trouble because I wasn't ungrateful, but it was like Christmas and I was telling my mom, like, I don't think it does that. Are you sure? And she was like, started getting mad at me and I'm like, okay, so I'm happy. And she got me the Star Wars, which is like one of the few good 32X games.
Oh, Star Wars Arcade?
That's what it is. Yeah. And it was dope. It was dope as shit.
I have that one somewhere around here.
I'm getting sidetracked, which I always do. The Tengen Nintendo split. Finish the weird licensing thing.
Atari Games, believe it or not, is one of the most confusing things in gaming. So Atari Inc. went bankrupt around 80. I think it was 83, 84ish. I might have my dates wrong there. Basically, when they went bankrupt, the company that owned them, Time Warner, basically split them in two. They took the part that made the consoles, and that was sold off to Jack Tramiel, who was the founder of Commodore Computers, and he renamed that half Atari Corp. And they were responsible for the 7800, the Jaguar, the Lynx.
All the really terrible stuff.
I love the Lynx, so I don't think that thing had a fair shot. So the other half of the company was Atari Games. That was the arcade division that made all the classic Atari titles.
Yes.
They were sold to Namco, believe it or not. And then Namco made a deal with one of their the president of their US subsidiary. He bought into it and basically was going to run the company independently from Namco. But because Atari Corp had the rights to the publishing name, they had to publish their names under the Tengen name.
Oh, yes.
Which is why when you play a lot of Tengen games, it'll say Atari Games under the copyright stuff. But Tengen was basically just their publishing arm.
And then that must have been dissolved not long after 8 or 16-bit because Tengen kind of stopped showing up.
So what happened with that, just to get sidetracked a little bit, what happened with Tengen was basically because Time Warner still owned a percentage of Atari Games, and after the Namco kind of sold some of their rights off to the guy who was running it, basically I believe it in the process of how it was, I guess Time Warner still had the majority. Eventually, like around like the PlayStation Saturn era, I'm not 100% on these. These are like what I've kind of picked up over time, but I believe it was just kind of dissolved into Time Warner Interactive.
Okay.
Who was eventually purchased by Midway Games.
I was going to ask, like, for some reason I had in my mind Tengen and Midway connected.
That's why that version of Klax is actually published by Midway.
Ah, yes.
But believe it or not, the studio that was like Atari Games lasted on until the PlayStation 2 era. Their final title was, did you ever play the PS2 game Dr. Mudo?
No, Dr. M-U-D-O?
It's like M-U-T-O, I believe.
Dr. Mudo PS2.
It was on all the systems. I played the PS2 version.
Oh yeah, this is like I call like this art style like the Pixar Jack and Daxter platformer or whatever what the term is for this.
That game was actually the final game made by the original, like what was left of Atari Games before they finally completely closed down.
Have you played it? It kind of looks cool.
It's a decent 3D platformer. It's not the great, like I'd play Jack and Daxter, like Sly Cooper Ratchet before any of those. It's got a decent little gimmick where you kind of like have this like power gun thing. You can use it to like do different like moves and transform into different things. But it's like solid enough. Like I had a fun time playing it.
Yeah, I'll probably do a video on this because that's a cool little fact that it's the final game by. I mean, Atari Games. They were the arcade kings for a hot minute.
Like I believe the director for Dr. Mudo was actually Ed Logg, who did all like the classic like Atari stuff back in the day.
Interesting. And the Midway did Atari, and is there any relationship between like the Midway racers and the Atari world?
There might be.
There's some like at least similarities on the surface. I wonder if there's interesting. Yeah, this looks cool. Dude, you've already dropped 2 games I've never heard of. This is cool. All right, I got to stop watching this because I can't pay attention.
Yeah, but anyways, going back to the Nintendo Tengen thing. Tengen was one of the earliest Nintendo licensees. So that's why if you actually look into it, there's 3 Tengen games that have regular NES cartridges. Like I think it was like Pac-Man, RBI Baseball, and there was one other game. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but those were the 3 that they made like legitimately. Then I guess there was fuzzy on the exacts, but I guess there was like sort of like a cartridge, like a transistor shortage or something, or like microchip shortage. And it was going to hurt Atari Games if they couldn't get the games out, and Nintendo wouldn't give them any sort of like leeway. They had to stick by the thing that everyone else had to follow. From what I remember is they actually went to the patent office, and you can like look at the patents for like anything in like the patent office. You just can't take anything out legally.
Okay.
Unless it's under litigation, then you have the rights to take any sort of like copywritten material out. So I guess they made like some sort of false like lawsuit against Nintendo so they could get the like the specs to like the NES, basically, so they could figure out what the I think it was actually the patent for the lockout chip.
And then once they had access to that, they get around it.
Basically, they copied it. And they claim they re-engineered it, but when they later got taken to court over it, it was basically shown that they didn't copy it. They just legit copied the code right over.
And did they end up paying some sort of reparation damages? What happened?
Basically, all the unlicensed games had to be taken off the shelves. One of the most infamous ones was, which is a completely another thing that I don't want to get into just because it's an even bigger mess, was their version of Tetris.
I don't know anything about that, and I don't know. Do we want to get into that mess?
Probably not. Because that would be its own
podcast.
There's a YouTuber called the Gaming Historian that I watch every now and then. He did it was like an almost hour-long video basically on the story of Tetris like itself. That is one complicated mess to get into.
I'm gonna have to look into that. Maybe do some videos.
That's where I learned a lot of the Atari Tengen stuff as well. This guy does like some like really in-depth like study videos on YouTube.
I'm gonna have to check him out. Someone else brought up this podcast Retronauts that I've been listening to a bunch. Pretty good. Anything that's like old school. That makes me, if you're born in 90, you said 95, right? 97?
95.
95. How did you get into retro games? It's like kind of rare. What got you into collecting and going you're obviously just balls deep into gaming.
Yeah, I am. So I guess we can go with the story. Basically, the first system was a Game Boy, but we had a PlayStation in the house growing up. Like that was just kind of the family PlayStation, which is one of the reasons why I didn't want to say the PlayStation was my first system because it didn't technically own that one. That was the family system. I did eventually get a PS1, like the small one with the screen, in like 2000, right when the PS2 was coming out. But I had already been playing the thing for years at that point because I had my own game. games. I just didn't have a system. I had to use the family one.
Did you, I mean, in my opinion, if you've been listening to the podcast, like the PS1 is the GOAT console for me.
To me, it is between that or maybe the PS2 because they both were
PS2 numbers wise is still the best, right?
It's the best-selling console of all time. With the Nintendo DS is just barely under it.
You grew up with the best. What was what's the first game you remember playing on the PS1?
PS1 was Crash Bandicoot 3.
Crash Bandicoot. What year did Crash come out? Crash.
I believe it was like 98.
And was it like, did you immediately, when did you start, like, the way to ask this question is, what game or what moment did you decide, I'm all in on gaming. This is my thing. I'm going to collect.
It's a bit predictable, but my friend at the time.
Is it 7?
Okay, so my friend at the time, we haven't been talked in like decades, but he had Final Fantasy 7.
Woo! Hey, you know what?
But this is where it gets funny. This was like a couple years after 7 was already out, but he had 7. I saw him playing it, and I was like, I need to play that. So I asked my parents for 7. But me being, 98, 99, me being 4-year-old who's kind of dumb, I added one extra I to the end of that 7, and I got Final Fantasy 8 instead. And you know what? I wasn't upset because I was like, oh, this one's cool too.
So you actually played 8 first.
My first RPG of all time was Final Fantasy VIII, and my God, what a horrible place to start. Not that the game's bad, just, my God, that game is not for beginners.
Dude, I was just going to say, for a 4-year-old, that game is not for no. The first time I played it, I got it like at launch, whatever it came out. So 2 or 3 years after 7, I was probably 12, maybe 11, somewhere around 13. The first time I played it, I didn't understand the junctioning system, and I got all the way to when you get the red ship, the Ragnarok. And something was wrong where I kept getting levels up. I forgot exactly what mistake I did, but I don't think I was drawing spells and then junctioning them to stats.
Yeah, that's like the most complicated part of the whole thing.
Yes. And I just I kept grinding and farming.
That's the thing. That entire game is counterintuitive.
Yep.
Like you don't want to grind because grinding causes the enemies to get stronger with you. You want to basically just draw your magic, run.
Yes.
Draw magic, run. You fight bosses because bosses don't give XP. They give GP instead. Or whatever the points for the Guardian forces were.
Yep. And so I basically ruined myself, and I couldn't beat the game. And then I replayed it later, years later. I was probably like 16, and then it became one of my favorite Final Fantasies of all time. I really liked that game.
A lot of people hate on the story. I love the story, but it might just because it was my first RPG, and I have massive nostalgia for it.
Yes.
No, I got the game around when it came out, but I didn't beat it until 2006.
That makes total sense.
I spent a lot of time playing it and just running around lost and just grinding enemies because I was stupid and didn't know what I was doing. But you know what? I still love that game. And it's what started, basically what got me into gaming, from then on.
I was from the moment I got an NES, I was like, this is, I'm a nerd. I'm going down this path.
Yep. So fun fact, after I kind of got into it, my dad had an NES and it was still in the house. So he basically gave it to me and it had a bunch of games with it. So at that point it was I was like, ooh, this is cool. So I had it had Mario, obviously just Mario 1 with Duck Hunt. And I actually have a gray Zapper too, because he had the original one.
So you got retro games on your own pretty early on. That makes sense.
For the most part, I wasn't really buying them until way later, but I had a selection of 12 NES games that I grew up with, basically.
Which one did you like the most?
Mario. That and Metroid. Played a lot of Metroid, even though I did not know what I was doing in that game.
Yeah, that's also a rough game for a 4-year-old.
Yeah. I was 5 or 6 by the time I got around to the NES. But
what is there a moment or something you can point to that flipped the switch for you to get into collecting?
Okay, so there is a moment, and it is bizarre. So for most of my childhood growing up, I went through elementary school, middle school. I basically just got games that were new. I had a PS1 and a PS2. I got basically what came out, what I wanted to play. I got a lot of RPGs because as a young kid, I realized I can't get a lot of games because money.
Yes.
So I bought RPGs because those were long and I'd have a ton of time with those. So around the point where it really flipped is on my blog, it says right on the top, it says gaming since 95, collecting since 09. 2009 was my freshman year in high school, I think, freshman or sophomore year. And I discovered that was basically when YouTube was really starting to take off. And I saw videos about the Dreamcast. And that's when I was really getting into history and stuff. And I was like, what is the Dreamcast? Because I had no idea. And then I found out it was Sega's final console. And from then on, I was like, I want a Dreamcast really bad. And at that point, I went on Amazon and found out Dreamcasts are still pretty cheap at that point. So that was I think my birthday gift that year was a Sega Dreamcast Sonic Adventure. And I got that thing in the mail and played Sonic Adventure and was I am terrible terrible at Sonic games. But
that game is hard. That game does not control intuitively when I go back and play it.
I love Sonic Adventure, but I won't lie and say it hasn't aged well.
It was it's funny you missed it. It's funny to me because the Dreamcast was one of the few consoles I couldn't get because of money. My parents wouldn't get it for me, but I had a subscription to, I believe, EGM, Electronic Gaming Monthly, and maybe something else.
I think that was
the hype. Mm-hmm. The hype for the Dreamcast was just unreal, and I hated that I didn't have one, and I wanted one so bad. And it's just, I find that crazy. You like somehow, because we didn't have the internet, and you just missed it. That's crazy.
I think I missed it mostly because we had one TV like that. Me and my sister shared, and basically we had to share the TV, and it was basically if I wanted to play video games, then I'd have to put up whatever she wanted to watch, which was probably anime or something at the time. Or I think she watched like Sailor Moon. So I kind of had to put up with that, and I'd watch that with her, and then I get game time. So it was basically between that or I'd be playing Final Fantasy VIII probably at that point because I had that game for a long time.
So 2009, you get the Dreamcast,
Mm-hmm.
you go back and you're like, holy shit, this is dope. I missed it. What else? Is it kind of like, what else have I missed?
Mm-hmm.
And you just start going deeper and deeper?
So then I start I discover YouTube and I'm like, okay, what's this? And I see just all these different channels just talking about old game stuff. And I'm like, what's this Saturn thing? Ooh, what's the Genesis? I knew about the Nintendo stuff because I was like the one, believe it or not, I was the one weird kid with a PlayStation. Everyone else had an N64.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Which was odd because it was usually the other way around at that point.
Yeah, PS1 definitely sold more, but among young kids, the 64, the Nintendo IPs they have a type of mass appeal that basically no other brand has.
Yeah, because I missed out on my first Nintendo console, believe it or not, was a Wii because we got a Wii around when the PS3 came out. I got the PS3, but we got a Wii basically for the family. So I ended up having access to the Wii because no one else really cared about video games. I didn't get a GameCube until 2010. So I missed out on Smash Brothers Melee, all those classic games growing up.
I was gonna say, what game probably do you wish you wouldn't have missed? You start collecting, you start trying out old games, you start learning. Is there a game you're like, holy shit, I wish I would have had this as a kid?
Nowadays, I wish I had a Sega Saturn.
Me too.
Because my God,
I love the Saturn.
I do too, and I've paid way too much money for my collection.
They're super high. So I gave up physically collecting. I had a really solid PS1 JRPG. That was my thing, JRPGs on the PS1, and that's how I came across you. Is seeing some of those posts. I ended up selling my whole collection because I needed money at one point. I really regret it, but I'm too heartbroken to ever start again. But I do have I have this giant ass. I have a 2080 Ti, this badass PC computer, and I play emulators 98% of the time. But Saturn is something I've been going back. The problem with Saturn emulation is it's really finicky.
Yeah, because the Saturn is just a mess to work with.
Yes, it's so tough to work with, and I really love the white Saturn,
the Japanese one, I believe.
Yeah, man, I want one of those so bad. And there's some dudes on Instagram that do the mods. They restore them, and I guess there's a mod where you basically have an SD card that holds games that you plug in.
Oh, that was the Stone Age Gamer guys, right?
Yeah, the Stone Age Gamer guy. You can get them, and I'm thinking about snagging one because it's there's a lot of games that I'm having a hard time getting to run, Guardian Heroes. Yep. I really want to play Guardian Heroes. It runs really shitty on every emulator. I've troubleshot it. There's a 360 re-release, but I don't have a 360, and you can't really emulate 360 that well, that game either. So I'm am I gonna buy a Saturn and then get the component and the all the shit? It's gonna be drama to even get the signal to my computer, all this to go through just to play Guardian Heroes, which I'm probably gonna do because there's no other way to do it.
That's the worst part about Saturn stuff too. Is most of those games never been re-released or they've just been lost because Sega was a mess back in the day.
Yeah, that I tried. The guy, Retro Hangover podcast, Chris, he mentioned this game Psychic Killer Tomorrow. It's this Japanese. Apparently, it's super expensive. I did get that to work.
I've heard of it
on Yabusa, which is a Saturn. Yeah, at Yabuse. I don't know how to pronounce it. I got that to work and played through most of that game, and it was awesome. Okay. A gem. Yeah, Saturns are sick. So you have one, or how many Saturns do you have?
I have one Saturn. I don't really own a lot of doubles of consoles. I have two PS1s because I had the little tiny one when I grew up, but I bought an older one just to have because I like the old PS1. And then I have I've got two PS2s because my original one died. Kind of. It sometimes works, but I have a slimline model of that. And other than that, I really only have one of each system that I currently own. So I have one Saturn, and I actually have a Japanese imported controller for it.
Nice. What is your most prized, most rare, most expensive piece of collection?
Probably Panzer Dragoon Saga.
Ooh, that's a cool classic.
Which is an amazing game. But I'm looking at my so many games in my PS1 library. I could say I have my box Luna Splatoon or two, my Clodelka. I've got an original Persona.
Ooh, I had that too. I had a black box original Persona 1.
I've got Persona 2 Eternal Punishment as well. That game, believe it or not, when I first got that was right around before like the Persona boom happened. The guy I bought it from wanted it for $20.
Yeah, that makes total sense because I was into JRPGs. I played Persona 1. I beat it. The only thing I didn't like, which I like now at the time, I like now, but at the time I didn't like the first person like walking through the town, like the hallways, and I didn't like how it switched to first person because I wasn't used to that. Like this is not how JRPGs are supposed to be. Now I think it's cool.
Persona 1 was very like Shin Megami Tensei like inspired still. It really hadn't found its own at that point. And my God, that localization is terrible, but it's amazing at the same time.
And I loved that it was like dark and more adult. I was kind of getting burnt out of like the teenage boy saves the world from the evil sorcerer or whatever. This was like demons. You have like high school kids. It wasn't the whole world. You were like, you stayed in a city. The whole thing took place in a city. And I loved that about it. Yeah, I love the dark tone. And then Persona 2, I forget the difference between Innocent Sin and Eternal Punishment. Do you know off the top of your head what that is?
Innocent Sin, the PSP remake, that is actually, so Persona 2 is actually a duology. Like both games are their own independent games.
I knew that, like they're not, but I was because I didn't beat either of them. I played both of them. I just remember being confused. So, okay, what's
Innocent Sin is the first part of the story, and the whole reason we didn't get it over here is I've heard mixed things. A lot of people say it's because of a lot of like the Nazi imagery in the game or something like that. Sense. But I think it had more to do with Atlas was a very small team at that point, so they didn't really have the resources to localize it at the time while they were working on the sequel, I guess you could say. Eternal Punishment is actually the second half. It basically same world, like same characters, only it takes place after the events. Because the way the story in Innocent Sin takes place, it kind of ends with everything kind of being reset, and then you start with Eternal Punishment, and you're kind of you're basically going on from there with what's happening now, and like this kind of alternate version of the first game, sort of. It's a little confusing. It's very Atlas, very Persona.
I just remember I beat the first one. I ended up with both versions somehow. I never like that Persona formula. Like it hadn't like you said, it hadn't boomed yet. And then obviously with 3 got really big, and then 4 became the behemoth. That
4, I say 4, it became kind of like the people kind of like open their eyes to it. I mean, I'm a little biased because Persona 4 Golden is actually my favorite game of all time.
We're gonna get to that, but yeah, Persona 4 favorite game, Golden all time, which means that'd be your favorite JRPG, which you're wrong on that. Well, but it is a great game.
I'm biased, but no, I think the point where the series really exploded was with 5, though.
Really, for me, 4 was, I guess, I played 1. I paid attention to it during 2 and 3, and I tried them, but I didn't like get into it. Then I had a really good friend who was he was number 3, John Jimenez, on the podcast, like a fellow JRPG nerd, and he's like, dude, you gotta play Golden, or you gotta play 4. You gotta play 4. And I'm like, I don't know. I've tried 2 and 3, and they just didn't. Whatever. It's like, I promise. And then I put, who knows, 250, 220 hours into 4. It was crazy.
I do a yearly playthrough, so.
Yeah, I have games like that for sure. That's cool. But dude, it is, I would say it's in my top 5 of all JRPGs of all time. Maybe top 3, depending on the day. It's really good.
Yeah, like I definitely say that. Like one of the hardest things for me is putting a top 10 like I've wanted to do a blog post about it for like years, like my top 10 favorite RPGs. I can't decide right now because they keep like fluctuating.
That's what I say. Depends on the day. My number 1 is pretty much always the same, and then after that, it depends on my mood.
See, I always say like the same 10 always kind of stay in there, but they switch around how I view them.
Yes, and we're going to get into that for sure. And I mentioned when I first messaged you on Instagram, Chris from Retro Hangover, I want to do a JRPG specific episode where we just go through, like starting with probably Final Fantasy on the NES, and just work our way through and talk about. That'll be fun as shit. So you get the PS1, you get collecting in 2009 because of the Dreamcast, and then you've obviously 2,300 and some odd items later. What is your most coveted thing that if you had infinite funds you could get right now?
I'd finish the Saturn Final 5.
That would cost some cash.
Well, I've got 3 of them. I've got Panzer Dragoon. That's the hardest one.
When I looked up Psychic Killer Tomorrow, when Chris told me about it, it was like $900 something on eBay. I was like, this is insane
because it's a Japanese one, and usually the Japanese games are cheaper.
Yeah, it's great. The Saturn, and then the Retronauts have this really great. I think it was Business Advance Wars. I get it mixed up. But hearing about how the Saturn was put together, allegedly, from what I understand, in 9 months, like the development time.
I've heard stories about
or 11
that.
months. Yeah. And it's actually a really cool console that they threw together to compete with the PS1 really fast. But yeah, it's a mess on the inside. It was there because it wasn't designed super well, manufactured, expensive, so their margins were lower. Or margins were way lower.
I kind of like to call it the PS3 of its time.
Yeah, I can see that. That's what PS3 was. I was actually going to ask, do you have a launch PS3 that has the backwards compatibility?
I do, and GameStop still wants it.
Damn.
They are so annoying about that. Like, they're like, ooh, we'll trade you in this money for it. I'm like, I don't want to sell it.
It's like, dude, I'm not going to sell that. I still have one. It died though. I used it for so many hours to play PS1 and PS2 games. I don't hear about those launch consoles breaking, but it got like the red dot. I took it in. Someone like redid the heat sink, and it worked for like another 6 months, and it just died. Doesn't work anymore.
My disk drive on mine died, and then I had someone replace it, and it's worked ever since.
That's one physical console I still wish I owned. Just the fact that it plays the golden era of PS1 and PS2 games in one machine. But you know, PS1 emulation and PS2 emulation is so sick. You can make things like AK. You can do a lot of cool shit.
It amazes me that Sony themselves are still struggling with it, but like other people have figured it out at this point.
Yeah, PCXS2 is the PS2 emulator I use, and it's honestly, I haven't come across the game that I can't play yet. And every game, other than maybe like a few tiny little like adjustments, I might have to adjust a few settings to get it perfect. It runs basically everything.
Now, if I had like a PC and I was like really had the time to like get into emulation and stuff, I'd totally be all over that. I spend all my money on games.
Hey, can you give me my wife was supposed to turn off my grill and she didn't. I'm gonna go turn it off real quick. Give me like 45 seconds. You know you've gone full dad when you have to interrupt the damn podcast.
That's all right.
Where were we?
We were discussing PS3 backwards compatibility and like emulators and stuff.
Oh yeah, emulators. The PS2, the emulator. Yeah, that's a good point because I don't have PS. Is it PS Now where you can play the classics?
Yeah.
Or PS
It's called PS Now. It's like a streaming thing, kind of. I've never used it.
Yeah.
I just because most of this I have pretty much everything anyways. But
yeah, I do like the PS. I like emulators like the PS1 to like PS3 and other consoles in that era. The emulators generally work pretty well. You can upscale things to 4K. You can have better anti-aliasing. Like the 64 in particular, a lot of games have texture hacks. So you can like play Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, but with like the graphic style of Wind Waker or super high-res graphics or like Mario 64. Actually, there's a Mario 64 PC port I was messing around with that if you have a RTX graphics card, you can do like real-time reflections, like super high-end lighting on Mario 64. I like messing around with stuff like that.
Funny.
That's what I got into now that I don't have the actual physical game collection anymore. Okay, so let's go back to PS1 because I think you're the only one on the podcast so far that's been like a true PS1 era JRPG, not minus Chris from Retro Hangover, which we're gonna do a podcast with them. So you play 8, you play 7 after 8?
So I didn't own 7 for a while. Basically, I just bummed off my friend for a while. But we kind of played through them both like at the same time. Like I'd go over his place, we'd play 7, he'd come over, we'd play 8, and we'd laugh at the graphics of 7 because how much better 8 looked at the time.
Yes.
But I mean, it's still
surprisingly better. Yeah.
I still think 8's one of the best looking games on the PlayStation.
It is. 8 just gets shit on a lot, and I get it, but it's a good game.
A lot of it has to do with obviously the gameplay is not the best. Well, I wouldn't say not the best. It's just not the most well explained.
Intuitive. Yeah. I also I hated the part in 8 when you find out like everyone grew up in the same orphanage.
Yeah, that got
and somehow forgot. Like, wait, what? You all what?
I think a lot of it had to do
weird.
with like the translation too wasn't the best because Square really hadn't figured it out at that point.
Yeah, I was listening to Retronauts and they were talking about Final Fantasy VIII, and I cannot remember what they said, like a better translation of the Japanese script, and they went over that section, and it was slightly better than the English version, but I can't remember what detail. It was like they explained somehow why they forgot that they were, I don't know.
It had something to do with
remember.
like Guardian Forces and stuff. It was weird.
Oh, I think using Guardian Forces like wipes your memory.
Something like that.
Like you lose long-term memory.
It was weird. Like I know the other...
That thing was
like
weird.
The other biggest like point of contention with like 8's like translation was like a lot of people can't stand obviously they couldn't stand Squall, but I think Squall gets too much hate.
Me too.
And then they didn't like Renoa, and that was mostly just because the translation kind of messed up her character.
She was kind of bratty.
That was the thing. She was in the Japanese version. She was written to be like Tetsuya Nomura designed her to be like more of like the cutesy character, like as opposed to like Tifa, who was just designed to be like all beautiful.
Yeah.
And I guess the translation she came off more as like a spoiled brat
instead of cutesy. Yeah.
Which it does understand why people kind of are like not into that, especially because the whole game is kind of like a love story.
And people didn't like, I was confused both times I played it, the Laguna flashbacks.
Yeah.
like that was really odd too. It did come together eventually and
it makes sense when it's explained to you, but for a while you're kind of like, why am I in the past all of a sudden?
Yes. Yeah, it takes you a while to even figure out if you're in the past. I did like his, he had the big fat dude and then the dude that was like the long lanky arms that had like hand knives, like Baraka almost. I thought he was a cool character.
Ward and I think like Kiros maybe or something like that.
Kiros. Yeah, you're right. I thought that dude's character design was cool. I like that.
I loved all three of them and I loved their theme song.
Their theme song was really good.
Man with the Machine Gun.
Yeah.
Hot take here. I think Final Fantasy VIII has the best Final Fantasy soundtrack.
Let me think. I do think Blue Fields is one of the best Final Fantasy songs of all time.
Maybe I'm a Lion's one of my favorite boss themes.
Yes, it is good. I do like it more than Sevens.
Sevens is good. Sevens is just dated.
And I think it's been rinsed. Like I've heard so many remixes and things of Sevens that it's a little rinsed. 10, I think 2 Xanarkand is like, that's a strong song, but as a soundtrack as a whole, I'd say it's better than 10. I'm trying to think. It's pretty good.
To me, it's tied with 9 and 6 as like my 3 favorite, but I love 8 is just like so, it's probably my nostalgia, but I always think like 8 is just like that soundtrack was like Uematsu's best work.
What's your, what do you think is the best JRPG that's like that, the underground that people doesn't give enough credit for on the PS1?
So it's between, I want to say Lunar 2, but that's starting to get a bit more recognition these days. So I'd actually probably say Kodelka.
So you posted about Kodelka. I think I commented and asked you something about it.
I think you asked if it was related to the Shadow Hearts games.
Oh, yes. Kodelka PS1. And I remember watching some gameplay of it when you posted it, and I was like, man, maybe I should try that. Let's see. I got to refresh. Oh, I remember thinking it looked a little like, damn it, stupid YouTube ads.
Yep. They're getting worse.
Sometimes the timing is just terrible. Ad, and that they freeze, then you have to refresh. There we go. God damn it. Now it's doing a Stadia ad. Now definitely not getting Stadia, you assholes. It reminds me a little bit of like, because the pre-rendered like it's like Resident Evil, the RPG.
So pretty much like, so what the guy who created it was actually the composer for Secret of Mana, believe it or not.
The game director was the musical composer of Secret of Mana.
He also did the soundtrack for Kodelka, but he wanted the game to be a lot more of like a straight up like horror game, but the team wanted to do more of like a standard turn-based RPG. So it kind of had like this weird kind of like infighting between the development, which is why it kind of has like this weird hybrid like style.
Which cool. I like I'm watching some battle sequences. So yeah, you leave the pre-rendered background like a typical JRPG. It loads a new 3D background, but it almost looks like Tactics where you move on a grid.
It's turn-based, but basically the enemy can move around and you can move around, so you can attack, and then you can position yourself so that you can kind of like, you maybe not get a direct hit or the enemy has to get closer to you, so you kind of like strategically kind of like play around with it, but it's still turn-based like in its like in like the other normal sense.
Yeah. Damn, I need to try this. Yeah, this looks really interesting, and it's I was aware of it. I don't know why originally what turned me away from it. Because I did play the Shadow Hearts games. I can't remember, like I'm kind of disappointed that I didn't play this game.
Trust me,
it looks cool.
I missed out on it and I paid a lot of money for it.
How much was it, if you don't mind me asking?
So at the time I bought it, I paid it for $100.
That's not too bad.
Since I've checked recently, like I was at a retro store last weekend or so. They had a copy. They were selling it for like $300. So I'm not sure if it's gone up or not, or if they were just like overselling it. But yeah.
Dang. What's another deep cut JRPG that you think doesn't give enough credit on the PS1?
On the PS1. Let me look at my collection here. You ever played Thousand Arms?
I did play Thousand Arms.
I think that's really one that doesn't get enough attention, mostly because it was an Atlas game that got barely any advertising.
I like the. I'm going to pull up so I can jar my memory a little bit. I remember thinking the art style was really cool. Let me pull up, make sure, because I got to make sure I'm not mixing it up with Wild Arms, which is another. Oh yeah, this is one I was thinking of. I don't think I beat this though.
I haven't yet. I have so many games now. I've played most of what I own, but I have not finished everything. That's for sure.
Yeah, I like the art style a lot. Did you ever play the first? I think it was the first JRPG on the PS1 was Beyond the Beyond.
I have Beyond the Beyond.
You know if that's right.
It's not bad. It was made by the original Shining team, and it's the developer that would go on to make Golden Sun.
Yeah, because the Golden Sun's battle view reminds me a lot of the way the PS... And when that came out, I didn't have a Super Nintendo, but my friend had a Super Nintendo, and I played JRPGs and was introduced to them and watched them play. But I didn't have really my own console to play one until I got the PS1. And I was like basically waiting for a JRPG to come out. And I bought Beyond the Beyond really early on. But there's a part in the game where you have to... I can't remember what it was, like move a statue or something. I got stuck. And one of your main characters, your tank, Samson, he's like your big buff, typical tank guy. You're damage dealer. He's cursed through like the first half of the game, and his levels are all like everything's like minus 50%. But if you level him up while he's cursed, you have like permanently lower stats.
Gotcha.
But I got stuck, and so I just farmed until I finally figured out where I was stuck, and then I got him uncursed, but he was like permanently nerfed.
Oh, okay.
Because I like farmed way too many levels. I got way too high level before you were supposed to get uncursed way before I did.
Oh, okay.
And then I ended up having a really hard time, and I got to like the final dungeon, and I couldn't beat it because I bet I could do it now, But yeah, I had nerfed myself. You have like a really cool class change moment, like is it Final Fantasy American 2, where like Cecil goes from Dark Knight to Paladin, I think.
Yep.
Similar thing, like all your characters class change, their battle sprites change, their world sprites change, they get new spells, like super rewarding.
I gotta play that again. Like I only got like an hour in before I moved on to something else.
It's very formula. It's basically a Super Nintendo RPG that has like pseudo 3D battles because it has like 2D sprites, but the 3D battleground they shift the camera, but your sprites are all. It's like Golden Sun. Like, more rough around the edges.
Yeah.
It's good.
I remember I played it like the beginning, and I just remember the opening took forever.
That's a good one. Thousand Arms is good. Did you ever play another one that no one talks about that I think is amazing? Is Valkyrie Profile.
I have Valkyrie Profile. I paid a lot of money for it.
Yeah, I sold. I had 2 copies of Valkyrie Profile. I sold my whole collection. I think I got like $680 or something, and I bet. Oh, yeah. Anyway, Valkyrie Profile is expensive. I've been playing it on emulator. I'm like probably 15 hours in. I never played the PS2 sequel, Samaria. I think
that one's pretty good too.
Have you played it?
I haven't finished it. I've played a decent amount of it. It's basically the same thing. It's a different story, I believe, though.
The only thing I don't like about Valkyrie Profile, which Chris brought up, is like to get the good ending. There's no way to figure out what to do to get the good ending without the help of the internet. Yeah, it's a guide game. Yeah, there's no way to figure it out. And I got a shitty ending, and it was like they lead all these like tidbits of like, who is Lenneth? Does she have a past life? Is she actually like in some cycle where she's a slave? She used to be a human. Like you get the bad ending, and none of those things get resolved. And it's a long game. And I'm like, I'm not gonna play this shit again.
That's like my biggest problem with most of these is like they're so long, and I just don't have the. My biggest problem is I got to move out of my parents' house and get my own place. That's what I'm saving up for right now. That's why I'm kind of slowing down on collecting. But I just I don't have the time to like pull everything out just to get an old RPG going when I can just hook the Switch up and play that.
Yeah, like you were right. As a kid, when you had unlimited time and very limited budget, JRPGs were the best bang for your buck.
Exactly.
But now when you got to pay bills, like I can't drop 60 hours. And the speed, like I love JRPGs, but when I go back and play them now, I do like playing like the 7, 8, or the 8 and 9 re-releases, or the 12 re-release on PC. They have the fast forward button. You can skip battles. You can like it cuts a lot of like the fluff out. I like playing that because you have a constant feeling of progression. It's not like trudging your way through this unskippable cutscene with that PS1 dialogue when it's loading the audio file. Like everything's delayed by like 2 cents. A person speaks blah 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 blah. 3, 2, 1. Oh, blah 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 blah. And it's so slow. It's like I don't know. I can't do it now. Even though I love that era, it's my favorite era of gaming. It is hard to play those games.
That's
now.
usually my grab the beer moment.
Yeah. Definitely. So obviously, Persona 4 is your favorite JRPG and favorite game of all time.
I'd say so. Yeah.
Favorite PS1 JRPG.
I want to say 8, but it's Lunar 2.
Lunar 2. Is that Silver Story? Lunar 2?
No,
the same
Silver.
one?
The first one was the Lunar series was originally released for the Sega CD 1 and 2, and it was Lunar the Silver Star, and then Lunar Eternal Blue. It wasn't actually called Lunar 2. It was just called Lunar Eternal Blue, and they just kind of put a 2 at the end of it for the US release. Both of those were then remade for the PlayStation under the in those like the big box releases, and it was it was Lunar Silver Star Story Complete, which is actually a port of the Saturn version, and then it's Lunar 2 Eternal Blue.
Oh, so those are the original Sega CD games just re-released on the PlayStation. They're not sequels.
No, they're remakes.
Okay.
There is Lunar 1's been remade like 5 times.
Give me a synopsis. It kind of looks like at the time typical like young kid with superpowers saves the world.
Kinda. I'm more familiar with 2 than 1 because I played 2 first because that makes sense. But basically 2 takes place like thousands of years after 1. So they're standalone. There's like a few minor connection points. But basically it's kind of like the typical like story, like you're the hero, you're on your quest, you run into this girl, and then you're on basically this mission to like save the world, essentially. And you run into all these wacky characters as you go on, and you kind of unlock more of the story as it goes. I
remember this is one of the few that I didn't like. Probably, yeah. I bet I had like 85% of all PS1 PS1, I would guess. I'd have to look at a list. And this is one of the ones I missed. And you're right, it has been getting more buzz. I've been seeing like on Instagram and communities and on forums. I think
I'm partially responsible for that because I won't shut up about that game. But
it looks, I do like the sprite work. Like the battles, I kind of like how it's that side. There's like a fake depth to the battle, like background screen.
Yeah, it was even more impressive on the Sega CD, to be honest, because that was like basically the Lunar games were like the reason to own that damn thing.
Yeah, this looks pretty cool. I like the enemy animations. How's the soundtrack?
Soundtrack is great. I'm not sure if I prefer the original Sega CD versions or the slightly like updated ones on the PlayStation. It depends on my mood, but soundtrack is incredibly catchy. It's got some funny voice acting too.
I'm gonna have to try this one. Any other PS1 RPGs that I might have not played or missed that you think are worth mentioning?
Did you play Legend of Dragoon?
Oh yeah, okay. Baby. That's one I'm surprised hasn't gotten because it's a Sony-owned IP. I'm surprised they haven't even just done like a re-release.
It was on PSN. I know that.
Probably was. I remember thinking it was this awesome mix of like it kind of took like the Power Ranger formula where you had like elements and you got these like awesome powers and suits and they upgraded, but it was fantasy like Final Fantasy VII. But it did the whole, and then when you get like same thing, you get like a class change like partially through the game, and all your suits and your abilities get changed. Your models change, and they have like better, cooler armor, cooler dragon armor. And then when I forget his name, the Wind dude, the green guy, when he dies, like disc 3, I think, disc 2 or 3,
something like that. It's been a while.
He gets replaced. That was like a video game death that really like, damn it, because he's like a playable party member for like majority of the game, and he's super noble. And anyway, he's that game was awesome. The cutscenes, the ending cutscene, I remember just being like really satisfying. Like I want to. A big part of those PS1 era RPGs, JRPGs, of the motivation was to get to the next cutscene. There wasn't CG cartoons and movies like there are now everywhere. Like seeing that level of quality of CG was hard to come by, and it was JRPGs. That's where you got to see it.
Yeah, it's actually kind of funny. My RPG collection is pretty much all Black Label. My Legend of Dragoon is the one green label I have because it's my childhood copy, and I don't want to get rid of it.
You could probably, is that game pretty expensive? I bet you could find a Black label.
I've seen Black Labels. I don't know. I have nostalgia for that green one, so I've just kind of kept it as that little odd duck in my collection.
Just kept it. It's a really good game. I tried playing it recently. It is very slow going back, but the battle system where you have to time the hit,
like the weird, like it was like a dial-up kind of thing. It was bizarre. It was cool though.
Yeah, it still feels engaging. It's like an advanced version of the Super Mario RPG system where you just have to hit the timing right to get some extra damage. But in Legend of Dragoon, you have like different combos that all have different timing, and all of them they're actually pretty difficult. Like the windows are narrow enough that you don't. It's not like you can just play the game and fall asleep and get them easily. Yeah, you have to stay engaged in the battle, and then that part I really liked. If they did a re-release and they could just sort of like make the overall speed up 30%, it's because I went back and tried to play it recently, and it's just dragged.
I'm surprised they haven't, because Sony owns that.
Yes, that's a Sony. That's like one of the first big budget first party Sony games I remember playing.
Good old Japan studio.
All right, so let's now let's open it up.
One other RPG though on the PlayStation that I just came to my head, and it's like you can't not talk about it. Suikoden 2.
Well, that's the greatest JRPG of all time. So of course,
that's it.
That's why you're wrong. That's why you're wrong about Persona.
It's in my top 10.
It better be in your top 3, or I'm going to hang this freaking hangout up right now.
It's been number 2 for a while. I'll say that.
It is, yeah. I mean, I joke. It's half joking, but I still do. Maybe it's not. For me, it is hands down the greatest JRPG experience I've ever had because Suikoden 1 was awesome.
It is.
And I had never played a game where it rewarded you in the next game for being like a full-on nerd completionist in the first game. I got all 108 stars in the first game. You carry that save over, and then you can get the protagonist from the first game and the second game, and how they were so connected. And that same thing we were talking about Persona 1, because the scope of the game wasn't save the world. It was you're just involved in this geopolitical conflict in one country, and you hear about other countries, and you have characters that come from different countries, but you don't get to go. And then you play the sequel where it's like a neighboring country. Some of those characters carry over. So there's references to characters, and like that interconnected. It was like the first time I felt like this is a world, and it's not the same like old save the world from the evil. It's Ultimisia, the time mage, that's going to collapse all time, or Sephiroth's going to bring a meteor to blow the whole planet up. It just felt so much more grounded, even though it was still not grounded. It's fantasy. It's all not grounded. But, and yeah, just when I got the protagonists from the first game and the second game, and they rewarded me, I was rewarded in such a tangible way for being a completionist. But a lot of times you get like maybe like an item or a sword or like a piece of cosmetic gear.
Yep.
It's like, I went through all this trouble to like get all 108 stars in both games. That's a big deal. Like, you better and that the reward was worth the time. Okay, we're going to give you the protagonist with the badass Soul Eater rune from the first game as a secret. Like, that to me, it was a huge deal. Huge deal. And the story was amazing. It was an amazing story.
One of the best PS1 stories, right up there. Damn, it's expensive though.
It is very expensive. And I wish, because it's my favorite game, JRPG of all time. And for a while, I might have said my favorite game of all time. Maybe not anymore. My yearly playthrough is Symphony of the Night. I play that game every year.
That's up there too. One of the best games.
Yeah. Not really a JRPG, but JRPGs and Metroidvanias were my favorite games growing up. Metroidvanias I can still play because they're not as slow. I still play lots of modern Metroidvanias, but modern JRPGs, like I tried to play, what is it called? It's like the snowy one. Not Lost Sphere, but the one before Lost. I Am Setsuna.
I haven't played that one.
It's like a Chrono Trigger kind of inspired. I tried that one. I've tried a bunch of modern. I tried Octopath Traveler. I can't do them anymore. But Metroidvanias, I can still play.
Did you ever play Bravely Default?
No, but I've heard really good things about it. I've heard the second half is like really grindy. People complain about it.
The first game itself has a very long and drawn out second half. The second game though got rid of that, and it's actually just a much better game overall. Like, it's imagine like a modern reinterpretation of like the first three Final Fantasies.
Okay.
Like, it's not like the active time system, but it's more like traditional turn-based.
Speaking of battle system, what is your favorite battle system of any JRPG?
The Tales series, probably.
Really?
I love the Tales series games. Like that, just like it combines action RPG with turn-based RPG, and it's, I don't know, I've always loved that. It might be because one of my other favorite games of all time is Tales of the Abyss.
That's another, man, you're into, like, for me claiming to be into JRPGs, you're bringing up like the handful of series that I've never played. The Tales series reminds me, I did play Star Ocean 2 on PS1, which has like that hybrid action. I'm watching some gameplay. I did play the GameCube Symphonia.
Tales of Symphonia was the GameCube one.
Yeah, I played that one.
That one's not bad. The only problem with that one is I played Abyss first, and once you play like a bit, the problem with the Tales series is the farther you go, it's so hard to go back because they get so much better as they go on.
Yeah. If I'm going to try a Tales game, which is the best one to try? Abyss?
I'd say Abyss. Vesperia is generally considered most people's favorite. That's the one that just got re-released on everything.
What is it? Vesperia, the protagonist with the long dark hair?
The one with the protagonist that looks like a girl, long black hair.
Yeah. This one, Abyss, the protagonist has long red hair, it looks like. So give me what's the main differences between Abyss and Vesperia?
Not a lot between those two. Vesperia's battle system is a bit more refined, I'd say. They all kind of stand on their own, like they're kind of like the Final Fantasies. They all have their own independent stories. Like you can play anyone. Do
they have any sort of like world lore connection between them?
There's like, it's kind of like how in the Final Fantasy games you have all like the spells that are the same, and then like sort of items and stuff they carry around, and the weird like money system. I think it's called like gold or something, and I can't remember right now. I got too many RPG currencies in my head right now.
And I'm looking at Tales. Yeah, I think I've looked at Vesperia. They did do that re-release on Steam, and I was eyeing it. It looks really good in 4K. I was watching some YouTube videos. It has like, it looks super smooth, 60 frames a second, 4K. I'm watching it looks awesome.
So that re-release is actually based off of the Japan-only PS3 version of that game.
Did it have like extra content?
Extra content, some added moves and stuff.
I might have to try this one. This looks pretty cool.
So it's actually kind of funny you brought up Star Ocean. Believe it or not, the Star Ocean team, Tri-Ace, actually was originally part of the team that made the first Tales game.
That makes sense to me because when I look at I'm watching this battle system, and I'm like, this just reminds me of Star Ocean.
So the first Tales game, Tales of Fantasia for the Super Nintendo, it was Japan only, I believe. It was Japan only at the time. But that was made by a team.
Did it have this same battle system? I'm looking it up right now. Sorry.
So it was more of a 2D thing. The Tales series is kind of split between, there's like two different versions. There's like the 2D styled games and then the 3D styled games. From like the 3D ones kind of started with Symphonia on, and then the 2D ones were the original ones. They have somewhat different battle systems.
This actually looks pretty. This was Japan only, this Fantasia?
The original Fantasia was Japan only. It did have a Game Boy Advance port, but the Game Boy Advance port's kind of hit or miss. It's not as good.
Has it been re-released? Because I'm watching a YouTube video and it has English translation.
There is an English ROM or like translation going around.
That's probably what I'm watching.
I actually have a ROM cart somewhere. I don't like to post ROM carts on my blog, just a personal thing, but I do have one of those.
Yeah, some people get weird about it, but sometimes people give me a little grief about emulators.
There's nothing wrong with emulation. It's not illegal.
I don't think so. And even if like I know technically a lot of the games I play I did own or have owned. Some of them I've never owned, but I don't know. I mean, I get it. I technically it's either like emulate or do what you're doing, which is collect. And if you're gonna put a gun to my head, I'm not ready to commit to collecting. I can't do it. So
there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, but I want to play the games.
I know. It's like, hey, you do what you got to do.
If you're not like, if I would say, if you wanted to be truly like 100% like perfectly ethical, if the game is available anywhere in a modern like re-release virtual console or whatever, buy it, spend the money. But if the game is not available anywhere, I definitely don't feel bad about playing it. Sometimes I'll just get it on emulator because it's easier. I don't want to go buy maybe a Xbox 360, like I said, to play Guardian Heroes. I could go buy an Xbox. I don't even know if I could actually, because I don't think that game's on Xbox Live anymore. So even if I own the 360,
you can still buy games on Xbox Live.
You can?
Yeah, I just bought the Banjo-Kazooie versions on Xbox Live recently.
Maybe I should just do that, because streaming a 360 is going to be a lot easier than figuring out how to stream a Saturn.
I bought a 360 just to play Tales of Vesperia, believe it or not.
Oh, nice. Before the re-release?
Yeah, this was like back when right when the Xbox One came out, and basically GameStop was just trying to get rid of the damn things.
What's your favorite soundtrack for JRPGs?
That one's tough because there's so many like phenomenal soundtracks.
You were saying 8 earlier, but I kind of we already talked about this a little bit.
It's 8's up there. Persona 5 soundtrack blew me away. That soundtrack is on another level.
I'm just waiting to see if you say Chrono Trigger, so I don't have to hang up on you.
Chrono Trigger is definitely up there. I love that soundtrack.
Yes, my favorite soundtrack, and usually in my top 5 of JRPGs as well.
I put Chrono Trigger up there. I like Final Fantasy 6 is great. Tales of the Abyss has a phenomenal soundtrack too.
Who's your favorite villain in the JRPG?
Favorite villain? I mean, I have a soft spot for Kefka from Final Fantasy 6.
He's a good one.
Oh, this is tough because there's so many. Kind of out there, but a Fawful from the Mario and Luigi RPGs.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
I've always loved that guy. Like Bowser's Inside Stories. That's one of those ones that floats just on the outside of my top 10. Sometimes it pops in there.
Yeah,
like that's a great one.
Give me your top 10. How you're feeling today? Just like rattle it off. What you're feeling today.
So Persona 4 Golden is always up there. Suikoden 2, Final Fantasy 8, Lunar 2, Phantasy Star 4. Like that is the greatest RPG on the Genesis. What else?
People, have you played Phantasy Star Online 2? I've been eyeing it.
That one's good. What else? Albert Odyssey on the Saturn. You ever heard of that one?
I have heard of it. Let me look it up, because Albert, it's a Saturn game and it's a JRPG. Odyssey Saturn. Is it Saturn only, or has it been released?
It's Saturn
somewhere
only,
else?
Unfortunately.
Let me look at this. Oh, dude, I like the Saturn. Man, Saturn games had such cool sprites.
They did. Saturn games that went for that full 2D look was like top notch. I mean, that was what the system was meant for. But
yeah, this looks awesome. I was recently playing in Japan. It has a different name. I think it's Thor something in Japan. It's Beyond Oasis. I was playing.
Beyond Oasis was the first one, and then there was Legend of Oasis. On the Saturn.
I can get that game to work on emulators, and that game's sprite work is amazing as well. Dude, this looks awesome. It's Albert Odyssey.
It's a really good game. The combat's kind of simplistic, but it's just fun, and it's got that working designs kind of charm to it.
What about it makes it in your top 10? Story, like, is it the story, the music, the aesthetic?
I like the story. I love the aesthetic. The music's okay. It's not one of my top soundtracks. It's that working designs charm that just kind of sucks you into it.
What story in JRPGs? I'm like ruining all the content for our future JRPG episode, but whatever.
Oh, trust me, I could go on for hours.
What has made you the most? For me, it's Suikoden 2 made me the most emotional. I have the most emotional moments. Like Final Fantasy 9 when Zidane turns out to be alive when you think he dies at the end. That was a big moment for me. What moments, like story moments, stand out to you for JRPGs?
I mean, obviously Persona 4, that whole the scene where
the reveal
where you see where Nanako almost dies, and you think she's gonna for a minute there, and if you make that mistake with the TV, she does die.
Yes,
that was one of them. This one's going back pretty far, but I might butcher the pronunciation, but Alice from Alice from Phantasy Star 4, her death.
I don't know. I gotta look. So Fantasy, damn, I'm like a poser. All these ones I haven't played. Phantasy Star 4. That was a Genesis game. Oh, I remember. So the reason why I didn't like Phantasy Star, or I never got into it, is I didn't like that like Dragon Warrior like straight on battle view. At the time I liked JRPGs that had the side by side or like the Suikoden or whatever, because I think it was Dragon Warrior I didn't like on the NES, and I was super picky about aesthetics. But now I'm watching some gameplay and like the character design, like they have these like comic book cutscenes.
That was what it was famous for, because you had like these anime manga style cutscenes between for like the very.
Yeah, these look dope.
Oh, sorry, go on.
They look dope, and it's sci-fi, which is my favorite. I don't know why I didn't fucking play this. Damn. Yeah, this looks cool. So what about Phantasy Star 4 sticks out to you?
So
like the best selling point to try it?
It is. Well, it's Phantasy Star 4 is like the final part of what was the classic Phantasy Star series before they went with the online style, and it basically tied together everything from the first 3 games. The third game is kind of the black sheep of the series. It's kind of off in its own little space. It does have a few things, but 4 is the one that ties them all together, and 4 has the most like solid like gameplay, the fastest battle system. It actually has like one of the earliest like auto battles I can think of, like in a game.
Oh, see, for me, Suikoden was the first auto battle option JRPG I played.
See, in Phantasy Star 4, it has this system called the macro system, and basically you can program what you want your characters to do. So you have like, I think there's like 7 to 8 macros you can program. So you can have one that's just like the straight up just everyone attack. You can have one like be like one guy attack, one person magic, one person heal.
Yeah.
And it's like you can program them. So it's like you can just, it's not quite auto battle, but it's basically, it's like rather than having to hit a bunch of buttons, you just hit one at the start of each turn.
It sounds a little like maybe a simpler version of the Gambit system in Final Fantasy 12.
Maybe a little bit. God, I haven't played 12. I haven't played 12 in years.
Do you need to play the first 3, or should I just like read a synopsis of the story and just try to play 4?
You don't really need to play the first 3. Like, I mean, there's a lot of things that'll make more sense, like with the world, but as the story itself is pretty much, you can play it by yourself on its own. Like, I played 4 before all the other ones. But in terms of 4 also has, you know how like a lot of people, Final Fantasy gets a lot of like, people always bring up Aerith's death?
Yes.
Believe it or not, Phantasy Star 4 did that like years earlier.
Main character's death.
So when the game starts, you're playing as 2 characters, Alice and Chaz. They're 2 like kind of like bounty hunters, and you start the game out thinking Alice is the main like protagonist throughout the game, and then as you get like about probably like quarter through the game, she gets like this like basically like terminal like attack hit on her, and she's like in the hospital, and you go on this entire side quest basically to cure her, thinking that she's gonna live, and then she just dies and she's gone from the rest of the game, and it just punches you right in the gut.
I think I found the cut. I'm going to share my screen.
Is it the scene of her with like the shocked face, and then
I think I found the still.
Oh, yep, that's it.
Tell me if you can. Yeah, that makes sense. So they do like a kind of like, you think she's the main protagonist, you're gonna, because they did that in like Chrono Trigger, where Chrono gets hurt, then you like lost in time, and then you bring him back. That's happened before, but so they lead you on to think you're gonna save her.
Oh, you do an entire like side quest basically to like save her life, and then you find out no, it didn't do anything, and she just dies anyways, and it just punches you right in the gut because you're like, damn. And she was a really likable character too, and like she had like a cool gimmick. She had like this like double boomerang thing going on.
All right, I'm gonna have to try that out too. Dang. So Phantasy Star. On the other one was Albert Odyssey. I'm going to bookmark these.
Phantasy Star is easier to get working on an emulator than Albert is, although it's 2D, so I don't think it would be that hard to get on a Saturn emulator.
It's the biggest problem I've had with Saturn emulator, and the main one I'm using is Yabusa, is any of the games that mesh 2D and 3D. So like Psycho Killer Tomorrow it's like a lot of games did it where the world is in 3D, or there's like some geometry, but then the sprites are 2D. There seems to be like, I have problems with all of those games, but if it's just a 3D game or just a 2D game, they usually work. So I'm going to try this.
That's actually off track a little bit, but that's actually one of the main reasons why the Symphony of the Night port on Saturn runs like crap.
Because there's 3D elements in the Symphony of the Night?
Believe it or not, Castlevania Symphony of the Night is actually built on a 3D engine on the PlayStation version. And that's why when it was brought over to the Saturn, because it was made for the PlayStation first, because it's based off a 3D... This is what I've read anyways. It was based off a 3D engine. It didn't translate over well.
Yeah, when I was listening to that, I think it's Business Wars or Retronauts about the Saturn and the development time and how they hodgepodge together this like hot rod machine in 9 or 11 months to compete with the PlayStation. The way it does 3D is like an archaic way that didn't take, basically the standard. I'm butchering this. If anyone's listening that actually knows shit about developing games, don't judge me. But from what I understand, is like the base of even modern engines is polygons as triangles, and the Saturn used like vertex points.
I think it was like quadrilaterals or something.
Something weird, right? Something I don't understand. understand, right? Some other method of, and that's what made it like, yeah. Which sucks is because that's another one I was trying to play on emulator, and I think it's the fact that the Saturn version of Symphony Night is known for running worse, and I'm trying to play it on an emulator, and the emulators aren't great. I was like, well, I want to play as Maria, and I want to check out the other areas that are exclusive to the Saturn version, and I got it working on an emulator, but it's so janky. I was like, I can't play this. I can't.
It sucks too, because it's also one of the more expensive imports too.
Yeah, so I definitely, the Saturn's one of those, I'm glad because that's a console I'm trying to go back and like familiarize myself with. I know there's a lot of really good, there's so many games. I tried Magic Knight Ray Earth because I read it was the final game released on the Saturn, and it was, someone mentioned in the podcast.
The final game for the Saturn was Magic Knight Ray Earth.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
That's one of the ones I don't have.
I played it, and speaking of slow JRPGs, it took me an hour to get out of like the intro to where you can even like walk around, and I was so angry. Like, I did a video on it, and I was like drinking a lot, and I was like, I can't do this game. I was just pissed. It took me an hour to like get to gameplay, and I'm not really into that like cutesy Sailor Moon anime.
It's based off an anime, actually, believe it or not.
Yeah. I like, we could talk about anime too. I like a lot of anime, or I love like 30% of certain things about anime. I tolerate the other like 30%, and the remaining 40% drives me up the wall.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I know there's like certain words and slang of like breaking down different styles of anime. I don't know what the word is for Magic Knight Ray Earth, but anything that's like Sailor Moon, Schoolgirls, I can't do it. I don't get into it.
Yeah. I mean, I admit I have nostalgia for Sailor Moon just because I watched it with my sister, but other than that, not really my thing.
I mean, the idea is like girl Power Rangers, which is dope.
Pretty much.
I'm down for girls having their own Power Rangers, but yeah, so I tried Magic Knight Ray Earth. The other one people keep telling me to try on Saturn it's like a top-down shooter. Everyone talks about it. Radiant Silvergun, I think.
I got that somewhere around here.
Apparently, that's a badass one. Have you played it?
Yes, I suck. Is it good? I suck at it miserably, but it's so fun.
I played a lot of Raiden on PS1,
that's
which
a
is
good one
another
too.
top-down. So
you ever played Ikaruga?
That's like the crowning jewel of those games.
Yeah,
from what I understand, I haven't played it, but
Radiant Silvergun was kind of like the predecessor to Ikaruga.
Okay,
but it was like the same studio that made it.
Okay. Sweet, dude. Well, I'm about running out of time. We're going to do more. I'm going to have you back on with Chris, and we're going to do another, like a full JRPG episode. Mm-hmm. Is there, where can people find you on your socials, check out your collection, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, this was fun.
Where can people find you online?
Sorry, you cut out a little there. So I don't have a really big online presence. I'm pretty much, you can find me at the Barber Who Games on Instagram. It's my blog where I just talk about games that I think are cool. And I give my own little
I think your Instagram is pretty big. I felt like, I can't remember, but I remember you get good engagement. You got comments on most of your photos.
I've gotten pretty up there. I'm just about to hit 8,000 followers.
That's pretty good for a game. I mean, retro gaming collecting is super niche. It's not like a big chunk of the population is super into collecting old school games.
I've discovered that there's a lot more than I thought. I mean, I think
more.
I had like maybe 100 followers when you started following me. I thought I peaked at that point.
Yeah, you grew really fast. There's a guy, you might have run into him. I believe his handle is Mezmoron, Mezmoron. Have you seen his collection?
I might have. I'd have to look. I might follow him.
I keep bringing him up in podcasts, and I need to just try to hit him up. Or the truth is, I'm sexist. I don't even know if it's a dude. I'm just assuming it's a dude. Statistically, it's probably a dude. But he's got like a legit like mini library he built in his house, like shelves and shelves and shelves. My guess is based on like looking at your pictures and what you've posted and seeing the background. If you have 2,000 some odd items, if I would like scale, I bet he's somewhere around like 8 to 10,000. I would guess just based on.
I'll have to check him out.
Yeah, I would definitely check him out. Barber Who Games. You post. What's cool about you is a lot of people will post retro content, but I think I could be wrong. Everything you post is from your collection, right?
Yep. I only post games I own, and I try to like make sure everyone I give my honest opinion about. I don't try to just like pander, basically.
Yeah.
And I like to share other things I like, which is why I put my little records in the background.
Sweet. Well, check him out, Barber Who Games. I'm trying to keep my episodes under 2 hours, which is the last one was 4, and that's the only complaint people have given me is like, I like your podcast, but sometimes I don't want to commit to 4 hours, or I'm sick of you guys talking for about the same thing for 4 hours and they can't hold people's attention, whatever it is. So I'm working on it. I'm listening to your guys' feedback. He's going to be on again, William Barber. I thought you were a barber.
No. Okay. So my last name is Barber. So it's just kind of a little running joke.
Oh, okay.
If you actually look at my blog handle now, it's actually, I'm listed as Bill, not actually a barber.
Because your personal, I forgot where it was, but you have a link to your personal and it said Barber as well. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize it was your last last name. So yeah, I thought you were a barber, but then you had long hair, and then your Instagram said you're a machinist.
This is my quarantine hair.
Yeah, I have quarantine hair going on too. Just keep growing it, man. Might as well.
I'm thinking about it. I kind of like it.
Sweet. Well, we're gonna have you back on. We're gonna do. I know we talked mainly about JRPGs, but that's just the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna have Chris on from Retro Hangover, and we're gonna go deep and argue. And basically, I'm gonna convince you guys that Suikoden 2 is the greatest. And
it's up there.
If I can't, it's up there. It's up there. I think Persona 4. Now that I think about it, if that is one that I'm okay with being like, it's kind of like I'm like way into UFC, and people talk about like the greatest fighter of all time, and there's always this debate. There's no such thing as the greatest fighter of all time, but there are definitely, when someone brings a certain fighter up, you're like, yeah, I could see that. Like, you're not out to lunch.
Oh, yeah, trust me, I'm a NASCAR fan, and like that's like another debate that's completely all over the place.
And people, I'm sure, I don't know anything about NASCAR, but I'm assuming that same sort of conversation goes on about the best drivers. Yeah. And so it would be like if someone came out and said some driver that was like really had no business being in the conversation, you'd be a little miffed. But I think Persona 4 definitely is in the business of being in the conversation for greatest JRPG. I mean, I haven't played 5, but people like my really good buddy who got me into Persona, we both got 5 at launch. I just didn't have time, so I shelved it. He played it at launch, and he called me like 2 weeks, and it's like, dude, I beat it, and it's not even close to 4. Like, don't even bother. Would you agree?
I prefer 4's story, but 5 does so much for the gameplay. It's like not even like funny.
I gotta play it. They're gonna do. I've been waiting for them to do some sort of re-release on the computer. I think it's gonna come to PC.
They put 4 on the PC.
Yep, and I have it. Bought it.
They put Catherine on the PC and the Switch, which makes me wonder if this is their testing ground. They're gonna see how these do, and then they're gonna think about 5.
Yeah. I think I'm gonna give it another go I think it'll inevitably come to PC eventually, and then I'm gonna give it. It'll come with any like extra DLC and whatever extra stuff, the ultimate, definitive, whatever they name it. I'm gonna definitely give it a shot.
I mean, I still haven't even had a chance to play the Royal yet, so
nice, sweet dude. Barber Who Games, thanks for coming on. I appreciate your time. It's super hard to get guests. I have to chase people down. You basically responded. You were easy to. You were there. You didn't stand me up. All the things that I like. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
No problem, man.
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 Thank you for your time.
No problem, man.